Marcus Ellison was 39 years old when he drove 4 hours to bury the only man who ever told him the truth, and discovered that the woman he called his wife had blocked his number before the dirt settled on the grave. He had taken 3 days off work. He had pressed his one good suit the night before. He had carried the casket, left rear corner, the same position his uncle Raymond had told him to take when Marcus was 12 years old and they were burying Marcus's grandfather together. Left rear corner, Raymond had said. You always carry the people you love from behind. You push them forward even when they're gone. Raymond Ellison was 74 years old when his heart gave out on a Tuesday morning in Charlotte, and he had left behind a modest brick house on Fairview Road, a 1967 Ford pickup he never drove anymore, a box of documents his lawyer had been holding for 11 years, and a net worth that exactly nobody in the family knew about. Marcus knew. He was the only one who knew. He stood at the graveside in the November cold and watched the people who had ignored Raymond in life suddenly weep for him in death. He watched his wife, Simone, stand 3 rows back in a black dress she had bought specifically for the occasion, her sunglasses on despite the overcast sky, her phone tilted just slightly away from him every time he glanced over. He watched her dab at her eyes and accept embraces from relatives she had complained about every Thanksgiving for 6 years. He had tried to call her that night, back at the hotel. Straight to voicemail. He tried again. Same. He opened his messages. Delivered. Then, nothing. He was a structural engineer. He understood load-bearing systems. He understood the precise moment when a structure that appeared sound had already failed from the inside. What Simone never thought to ask, not once in 7 years, was whose name appeared on the secondary beneficiary line of Raymond Ellison's estate documents, or what Raymond had been doing with $1.4 million in a private trust. Since 2011, what happened next would cost Simone everything she thought she was about to gain. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from, and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The morning of Raymond's funeral had started the way most of Marcus's mornings started, quietly, before anyone else was awake. With coffee he made himself and drank standing at the kitchen counter of the Charlotte house he had renovated almost entirely with his own hands. The backsplash was his work. The crown molding was his work. The deck out back, the refinished hardwood floors, the load-bearing wall he had opened up between the kitchen and the dining room. All of it his, designed on graph paper at the same counter where he now stood drinking dark roast from a plain white mug. His father used to say, before he passed, that a man who could build a thing understood it differently than a man who could only buy it. Marcus had taken that seriously. He was, on paper, a mid-level structural engineer at a regional firm in Charlotte. He drove a 6-year-old Jeep Cherokee. His work boots were resold twice before he replaced them. His colleagues knew him as the quiet one who double-checked everything and never took credit for other people's mistakes. His other phone, the one he kept in the interior pocket of his jacket, the one registered to an LLC his uncle had helped him establish in 2014, stayed powered off in the nightstand drawer when he was home. Simone was asleep upstairs. She had come in late the night before, which was not unusual. She worked in pharmaceutical sales, which meant irregular hours and client dinners that Marcus had long since stopped asking about. He had heard her come in at 11:40. He had noted the time the way he noted everything, not with suspicion at first, just with precision. Engineers noted things. She appeared in the kitchen at 7:15, dressed already, heels on, which was unusual for a Wednesday morning when she had no appointments on the shared calendar. "You ready?" she asked. "Almost." He rinsed his mug. She kissed his cheek, a light press that was warm and practiced and slightly too deliberate, the way a person kisses someone they are performing for rather than loving. He had not let himself name that observation until recently. He was naming it now. In the car, she scrolled through her phone the entire drive to the church. He thought about the first time he had ever seen her. It was at a professional mixer in uptown Charlotte 7 years ago, the kind of event neither of them wanted to be at. She had been standing near the bar, not drinking, just observing, which was the same thing he had been doing, and he had walked over because he recognized something in her stillness that reminded him of himself. She had laughed at something he said that wasn't particularly funny, and he had decided that a woman who laughed at something unfunny out of genuine warmth rather than politeness was the kind of woman worth knowing. They were married in 2 years. They had no children. She had said she wanted to wait. He had agreed. He understood now, sitting in the pew behind her at Raymond's funeral, watching her thumbs move in her lap, that the waiting had not been about readiness. The signal came 3 weeks before the funeral, though Marcus did not identify it as a signal until later. It was a phone call from Raymond himself. Raymond who never called, who communicated in person or not at all, who had summoned Marcus to his house on Fairview Road on a Sunday afternoon the way he summoned everyone, which was simply by being there and expecting them to show up. "You need to come by," Raymond had said. Just that. Marcus had gone on the following Saturday. Raymond had made coffee, and they had sat on the back porch, and Raymond had looked out at the yard for a long time before he said, "I need to know if you've looked at the documents Phyllis is holding." Phyllis Aiken was Raymond's attorney. She had been Raymond's attorney for 30 years. Not recently, Marcus said. "Look at them again," Raymond said, "before anything else happens." Marcus had understood this to be Raymond's way of telling him something was coming. Raymond never explained more than was necessary. He had grown up in a time when extra words were a liability. 2 weeks later, Raymond was gone. And now, standing in the hotel parking lot on the night of the funeral, his phone showing Simone's number and the word voicemail, Marcus began to understand the shape of what Raymond had been trying to prepare him for. He did not panic. He went inside, opened his laptop, and pulled up the shared bank account. The withdrawal had happened that afternoon. $14,000. Transferred to an account he did not recognize. He sat with that number for a moment. He went back through the transaction history with the same patience he applied to load calculations. He went back 6 months. He found 11 transfers he had not previously flagged, amounts between $800 and $3,000, irregular enough to seem like ordinary expenses, patterned enough, once you laid them side by side, to tell a different story. $62,400 over 14 months. He had not seen it because he had not been looking. Simone handled the household accounts. He had trusted her with that the way he trusted the engineers who reviewed his drawings, as professionals doing a job they had agreed to do. His hands did not shake. He opened a new tab and pulled up the document portal for Phyllis Aiken's office, which he had been granted access to 11 years ago, when Raymond first established the trust. He had not logged in for 8 months. The documents were where they had always been. He read them for the first time in their entirety, not the summary he had skimmed before, but the full text. Every clause, every schedule of assets, every provision. He read until 2 in the morning. He closed the laptop, set his phone on the nightstand, and lay down on top of the covers in his suit and looked at the ceiling. Raymond, he thought, you always were 3 steps ahead. He opened a new folder on his desktop the next morning. He named it simply Fairview. Then, He made a single phone call. Phyllis Aiken's office was on the 14th floor of a building in uptown Charlotte, and she was waiting for him when he arrived at 9 o'clock sharp, 2 days after the funeral. She was 61 years old, small and composed, with reading glasses on a chain around her neck, and the demeanor of a woman who had seen most things and remained unbothered by all of them. She had the documents laid out on the conference table before he sat down. "He told me you'd be coming," she said. "He told me within the week." He knew? Raymond knew most things. He just waited for the right time to say them. She set a folder in front of him. 3 days before he passed, he signed a codicil. The primary estate, as you know, transfers to you as sole beneficiary. The house, the truck, and the contents of the trust. She paused. He also left a letter. Marcus read the letter twice. It was 1 page, handwritten in Raymond's careful block print. It said, "I always knew about the money. I wanted to see what she'd do when she thought there was more. Now you know too. Build something that lasts, nephew. You already know how." Phyllis watched him fold the letter and place it inside his jacket. "There's one more thing," she said. She pushed a second folder across the table. Raymond hired an investigator in September. Before he passed, he received a full report. Marcus opened it. The man's name was Derek Fowler. He was 44 years old, worked in regional medical device sales, same industry as Simone, which was not a coincidence. They had been conducting an affair for approximately 22 months. The investigator had documented 11 hotel stays, 47 cell phone contacts in a 6-week window, and 2 instances of Derek Fowler's vehicle parked on Marcus's street during hours when Marcus was documented to be at work. Derek Fowler was also, as of 8 months ago, the recipient of wire transfers from an account held jointly by him and a woman named Simone Ellison. The transfers drawn from a household account Marcus had co-signed. His face remained perfectly calm. "How solid is this documentation?" he asked. "Forensically solid," Phyllis said. Raymond didn't believe in doing things halfway. Marcus nodded slowly. "Neither do I." He left her office at 10:45 and drove to Raymond's house on Fairview Road, which was now legally his. He sat on the back porch where he and Raymond had shared coffee 3 weeks before, and he looked at the oak tree Raymond had planted in 1987. And he thought about load-bearing systems and the precise moment when a structure that appeared sound had already failed from within. Then he went home and made dinner. He set 2 plates. He asked Simone how her day was. He listened to her answer. She mentioned nothing about the $14,000. She mentioned nothing about the blocked calls. She was bright and conversational and entirely composed. He ate his food and answered her questions and cleared the plates. Preparation was the work. 3 days passed. During those 3 days, Marcus drove back to Phyllis's office twice. Met once with a forensic accountant named Gerald Osai, who had been recommended by Raymond's estate for exactly this kind of situation, and spent one evening in the kitchen of his Aunt Verna's house on Providence Road, eating her sweet potato pie and telling her everything. Verna was 68 years old and had known Simone since the wedding. She listened without interrupting, which was unusual for her. When Marcus finished, she set down her fork and said, "I never told you this, but Raymond told me before he passed. He said that woman was counting money that didn't belong to her. He said he could see it in her eyes at Easter. Did he say anything else?" "He said you'd handle it right." She picked up her fork. "Don't prove him wrong." Gerald Osai spent 48 hours running a forensic trace on the household accounts and the transfers to Derek Fowler's account. What he found went further back than Marcus had identified. The pattern began not 14 months ago, but 26 months ago. Which was, Marcus noted, almost precisely when Simone had suggested they consolidate their finances into the joint account. The total extracted across that period, including transfers Marcus had assumed were household expenses, was $89,400. Gerald produced a 14-page report with transaction logs, account numbers, transfer timestamps, and a summary that read, in his careful professional language, as a deliberate and sustained pattern of financial misconduct. He emailed it to Phyllis. Phyllis added it to the Fairview folder. Marcus drove home on Thursday evening and found Simone in the living room, on the couch, her laptop open, her phone face down beside her. She looked up when he came in and smiled the smile that had once seemed warm and now read to him like a signal he had finally learned to decode. "Long day?" she said. "Not too bad," he said. He hung up his jacket. He saw her glance at it the way she had been glancing at things lately, measuring, assessing. "You want to order something or cook?" "Let's order," she said. "I'm tired." He ordered Thai food from a place she liked. He set hers on the coffee table in front of her. He sat in the chair across the room and ate his in silence while she scrolled through something on her laptop that she angled slightly away from him. "Some things you didn't say. You waited. You let the other person believe the room was still theirs." On Friday morning, Phyllis Aiken called Simone's attorney, because Simone had an attorney, as the investigator's report had confirmed, retained 6 weeks ago, and delivered a formal notice of pending legal action regarding financial fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and fraudulent transfer, with documentation attached. She also delivered a copy of Raymond Ellison's estate documents, specifically the sections pertaining to clawback provisions, and the clause Raymond had included, in consultation with a tax attorney in 2011, that allowed assets transferred from a joint account in the 90 days prior to or following an estate event to be reclaimed under specific conditions. Raymond had written that clause himself. He had told Phyllis at the time, "I don't know exactly how this will matter, but it will matter." Simone called Marcus at 11:47 on Friday morning. He let it ring. Real power operated in quiet rooms. The meeting was held on a Monday morning in Phyllis Aiken's conference room, because that was where the paperwork was, and because Phyllis had suggested it, and because Marcus had agreed. He arrived first, as he always arrived first. He wore the same suit he had worn to Raymond's funeral. He sat at the head of the table. Simone arrived 7 minutes later with her attorney, a man named Todd Beal, whom Marcus had never met. Behind them, which Simone had not anticipated, came Derek Fowler, who had been separately served and had come, Marcus suspected. Believing this was a negotiation, it was not a negotiation. Marcus's brother Calvin was there, quiet in the corner. Calvin, who had known Raymond since childhood and who worked for the Charlotte County Recorder's office and had spent the last week pulling property and transfer records. Phyllis sat at the table's other end. Gerald Osai had sent his report by certified courier. The report was in a manila envelope at the center of the table. Simone looked at Marcus. He looked back at her steadily. "Thank you all for coming," Phyllis said, and opened the folder. What followed was 45 minutes of Phyllis laying documents across the table, one by one, with the patience of someone who had done this before and would do it again. The bank transfer logs, the hotel records from the investigator's report, the forensic accounting summary, the timeline, the attorney retainer receipt dated 6 weeks before Raymond's death, which raised a question Marcus's attorney had already drafted into the legal filing. How had Simone known, 6 weeks before Raymond died, to begin preparing for an estate dispute? Derek Fowler understood the answer to that question before anyone said it aloud. His face did the thing that faces do when a person realizes they are in a room they entered wrong. "This is circumstantial," Todd Beale said. He was looking at the documents without touching them. "The account transfers are time-stamped," Phyllis said simply. "The account numbers are documented. The forensic accountant's report is 14 pages. The investigator's report is 22 pages. The estate provision is notarized and dated 2011. She paused. "What part are we calling circumstantial?" Simone took off her sunglasses, which she had been wearing inside, and set them on the table. She looked at Marcus for a long moment. "Marcus," she said. Her voice had dropped into something lower, private, the register he associated with the early years. "We can talk about this. We don't have to do this here." He said nothing. "I made mistakes," she said. "I know that. But we have 7 years. 7 years, Marcus. That means something." From the corner, Calvin cleared his throat. "7 years where?" he said quietly. He was looking at the hotel records, because according to this, you were at the Marriott on Independence on your 4th anniversary. The room went silent. Simone's mother, who had been called by Phyllis as a courtesy, Raymond had known her since before Marcus and Simone met, was seated near the door. She had said nothing for 45 minutes. She said something now, in a voice so low and so flat it carried more weight than a shout. "Simone, stop." It was 3 words. They were enough. Marcus stood. He gathered nothing. There was nothing of his to gather. He buttoned the center button of his jacket, the habit he'd had since his father first taught him how a suit was worn. He looked at Simone one last time. She was still sitting at the table, her hands flat against the wood, the documents spread around her like a blueprint of the past 2 years. "You picked the wrong man to count money on," he said. "I know how things are built. I know what the inside of a structure looks like before it falls." He paused. "I saw this before you finished planning it. I just waited until the documentation was right." He turned and walked out. He did not look back. The elevator doors closed, and he stood in the silence of his own reflection in the polished metal, and he breathed once, steady and slow, the way Raymond had taught him to breathe when the weight was heavy and the work was long. Then the doors opened, and he walked out into the November air and got into his car. He drove to Fairview Road. 9 months later, the house on Fairview Road had been renovated from the subfloor up, and Marcus Ellison sat on the back porch he had rebuilt, board by board, in February, and watched the morning come in through the oak tree Raymond had planted 37 years ago. The coffee was dark and strong. The yard was quiet. He had kept his job at the firm, but he had also activated what had been dormant for 3 years, the private engineering consultancy Raymond had helped him register in 2019. The one with 2 contracts Marcus had been holding, waiting for the right time. The right time had come. The consultancy now held a municipal infrastructure contract worth $2.3 million. The first of what Gerald Osai was already calling a significant portfolio. A woman named Diana sat at the kitchen table inside, visible through the back door, reading something and drinking tea. She was a civil engineer who worked for the city. She had met Marcus at a professional conference in March and had asked him 3 questions about a load calculation in his presentation that nobody else had thought to ask. He had noticed that she listened the way careful people listened, without preparing her next sentence while the other person was still talking. They had not rushed anything. There was no reason to rush. Simone's license to practice pharmaceutical sales had been suspended pending a civil fraud investigation that was now a matter of public record. She was living in an apartment in Concord. Her name had moved through the professional network the way a damaged load-bearing element moved through a structure, quietly. Then suddenly, everywhere. Derek Fowler had quietly relocated to Atlanta, where Marcus understood he was working in a diminished capacity for a smaller distributor. Her attorney Todd Beal had settled the civil claim without trial. The $89,400 had been recovered in full. The estate provision had held exactly as Raymond intended. Simone's mother had sent Marcus a card in April. He had read it once and placed it in a drawer. He pressed his coffee mug against both palms the way Raymond used to do and looked at the oak tree. The leaves were just beginning to come back in. Raymond had told him once, on this same porch, that there were two kinds of patience. There was the patience of waiting for something to happen to you. And there was the patience of a man building something he intended to outlast himself. Marcus understood the difference now in a way that he had only partly understood before. He heard Diana's chair push back inside, heard her footsteps on the refinished floors he had laid himself, heard the door. "Coffee's still on," he said, without turning around. "I know," she said. She sat down beside him. She did not say anything else for a while, and the quiet between them was the easy kind, the kind that didn't need filling. He had built everything worth keeping. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.